Somebody. Our story today is one of the most well-known stories on the planet, Wizard of Oz. Probably better known than any single religious story, as hard as that is to grasp, because it's known the world over, and religious stories are regional, even the big ones. I have a poem that our literary curator, Ann Bach, has selected for us today. It's by Ted Kooser, Librarian of Congress, well-known poet, in which he reflects on a volume read through childhood, an old book. And maybe you can think back to some favorite reading, some story maybe you read more than once in your childhood, and how you even got attached to the material of the volume in addition to the story within it. Even after you'd set it aside for a lifetime, its cloth binding, the color of old window shades, and stamped with blue ink, it is still slightly sticky when warmed by hands. And when opened, the pages are rough, browning in from the edges like a letter that somebody left on a stove. Each page coarse as old wallpaper, brushed as you felt for a light switch. One of those vanished push-button switches with a circle of pearl on the on button. The 60-watt bulb sizzling on after only a moment's reluctance, revealing a room with a chair and a small shelf of books. And even in daylight, after all those years, you still want to strike a stick match and light all the lanterns you found in that story you read with such pleasure so far in the past. We begin in a gray place, gray as far as the eye can see. We're in Kansas. We're in a simple chicken farm, not doing too well during the Great Depression. And Dorothy is in trouble. Well, Toto is in trouble. Coming home from school, Toto got in the yard of Miss Gulch, the neighbor Grouch. The name sort of tells you she's going to pull us down, Miss Gulch. And he chased her old cat, and when she tried to shoo him away with the rake, he bit her. No great injury, but still. She threatened that she would go to the authorities and destroy Toto, and that is the starting point in our story. That is what Dorothy brings to Aunt Em, who's too busy to listen. Aunt Em has financial problems. She's got a couple hired hands. She's trying to keep this thing going. The incubator that hatches the little chicks from the eggs is broken, wobbly, not working very well, and they're worried. They're all worried. These are adult concerns, and no time for a child's fear about her dog's safety. Symbolically, the dog, an animal, represents our physicality, our emotional well-being, our physical health. Sometimes we ignore it. Sometimes we're so worried about practical things, we don't pay attention to Toto's well-being. Now, our protagonist that we're all identifying with, we're all Dorothy in this story. Dorothy, Dorothea, gift of God, big name, last name Gale. Well, she's got a lot of energy, and there will be a Gale in the story. Well, she wanders off and tries to play. She's still worried about Toto. She's pretty distracted. She's balancing on a fence and sort of falls off, doesn't hurt herself, but she's in the hog pen. The hired hands come help her out. Aunt Em, who's trying to run a business, comes over and says, "Go someplace you won't be any trouble." Dorothy ponders, "Someplace I won't be any trouble. Is there such a place?" And she kind of is talking to Toto, and this is when she breaks into song. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Her longing for this place, well, it's not a place so much as a feeling of safety, a feeling of connection, a feeling of belonging, and it is eluding Dorothy at this point in her life. We don't know much about her parents. We don't know why she's with Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, but She's not very well protected. They're good enough parents. There's food on the table, there's a roof over her head, she's got her own little room, but there's not much connection. Miss Gulch shows up again on her bicycle, stern, with a piece of paper. The official right from the authorities to take this dangerous animal away and have him, to protect public safety. So Toto ends up in the basket of Miss Gulch's bicycle, and she's riding away, and Dorothy is distraught. Why didn't Aunt Em, why didn't Uncle Henry step in? They're adults, they could do something. Well, Miss Gulch says, you don't want to get on the wrong side of the law, do you? They don't have time. They can't get a lawyer. They can't even take the time away to go down and appeal this. There's nothing to be done. Toto did not read this official paper. Toto never liked Miss Gulch. The latch to the basket vibrates a little on the rough road. The lid is loose. Toto pops out, runs back to Dorothy. Big turning point in the story. Dorothy does something unexpected. Dorothy has been a pleaser, a get-along kind of person, not oppositional, not a troublemaker, not very independent. But things are dire now. Toto is in danger. Dorothy runs away. Dorothy runs away. Never done that before. Doesn't even know where she's going. Has to do something. Has to take action. Doesn't get very far. Gets down the road there's a fellow camping, roughing it. I think we call that houseless. Anyway, he's got a gypsy wagon, a one-horse wagon with a very impressive sign. Well, it's a bit faded, but it says, Professor Marble, acclaimed by the crowned heads of Europe. Whoa, he's been to Europe? Crowned heads? He's been to the sign painter. He's from the carny world. Okay, he welcomes her graciously. He has grand manners for a guy in a threadbare jacket. He's out there fixing his dinner, which is a hot dog on a stick, which he ends up sharing with Toto. He's a generous soul. And with great aplomb, he invites her into his little consulting room, brings out the crystal ball, which he claims is from the court of Isis. Whoa, court of Isis, ancient Egyptian crystal ball? I think it came from a carny supply store in Poughkeepsie. But anyway, he begins to tell her story. Actually, in a way, it does. Even though this is bunk hokum, he is bringing the power of ritual into little Dorothy's life. He is bringing the court of Isis in the imagination. And he says, close your eyes. It works better if you close. But this is his shtick. He's done this. This is how he makes not a very good living. But she's got a little basket, like a purse, a little girl's thing. There's a couple things in there. And he looks in there, and while he's giving her the warm-up, you want to see things. You want to see the great mountains, the great cities. Well, this is a wandering kid. That's a pretty good guess. Might like to see things. She says, oh, yes. Oh, you can read my mind. You understand me. Then what he found in a basket was a little snapshot of a woman. It's Aunt Em. On the back, it says Aunt Em. Wait, no, I'm starting to detect a problem. Trouble. Someone is very worried about you. Someone is very scared. The letter M comes to mind. M something, and Dorothy chimes in. You mean Aunt Em? Yes, Emily is the proper name. Well, that's just a guess, but Emily, that's pretty good. So, okay, he's got her. But now he's saying, she's worried about you. Actually, she hasn't even noticed she's gone yet. She hasn't been away very much. So what is he doing? He's stirring up some unpleasant, he's manipulating her, getting her upset, feeling a little guilty. Oh, what have I done? And she starts to almost cry and turns it and goes toward home. Well, he just said, get off the road. Go home, kid. And maybe he is a kindly old person who just thinks that this child shouldn't be wandering around. But in mythic terms, this is the quest. This is the journey towards self-actualization. This is all drawn from Theosophy. L. Frank Baum was very anti-Christian, very interested in what was then a very new religious movement, Theosophy, arcane teachings, mystical channelings and things. There was, in the 1800s, some very interesting religious movements, including spiritualism. But this one was appealing to L. Frank Baum, and there are little bits of it thrown in through this story. So he is, in fact, telling the shamanic quest. This is not happenstance, not sort of a casual comparison. It's in there on purpose. This stage is called refusal of the call, where you start out and then get cold feet and you turn back. Very, very common. In fact, it's so common that you can kind of expect it, and there's no points off. If you get cold feet, well, okay, it was a trial run. It'll help you when you do the real quest. But Dorothy comes home, and in fact, between the time he said it and now, they have started worrying about her because there's a cyclone on the horizon, tornado. And she comes home, things are blowing all over the place. She goes to the storm shelter, which is built, there's not much of a building, it's a little tiny house, a shack of a house, but there is a tiny hole in the ground underneath the house where you can hide if a tornado comes. But she's pounding on the door and they can't hear her. She is literally an orphan in the storm. Goes into the house hoping for shelter. Actually, bad idea. You're probably a little better off outside in a tornado. A weak, poorly built frame house is just going to explode. Anyway, she goes in there. The swing door is swinging. The door is swinging. The door to her tiny little room is swinging. A tree branch flies through the window and a piece of the frame hits her and knocks her out, which she doesn't know. You don't know when you're awake or when you're dreaming. It's a continuous reality to her. And now she is seeing things fly through the air. Well, it seems like the house has been lifted up in the tornado. And she sees the chicken coop fly by and the ranch hands and a cow. And then she sees Miss Gulch on her bicycle turn into a witch on a broomstick, and then thud, the house lands somewhere. Well, she puts her head out the door and says to Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. I agree. Glinda comes out of a little bubble. Who is this? She's very strange. Arriving in a bubble is like a UFO or something. This would be the mentor figure. This is the fairy godmother of our story. This is the one character with some connection to the angels. She is on our side. It happens. In our long journey, if you ponder, there were moments that people were kind. There were moments when somebody knew a little more than you did and showed you the way. It comes through various forms, but you don't get somewhere in life unless you've had a little help somewhere along the line. The new mentor, Glinda, says, are you the new witch from the planet Kansas? Well, I'm from Kansas, but I'm not a witch. Well, I need to ask, are you a good witch or a bad witch? No, I'm not a witch, which is a little confusing to Glinda, since she had heard, well, actually, Glinda is probably a little more right than wrong. Dorothy is not an ordinary person. To be here, to have come by this celestial means, is special. Something's going on. There's a big welcome. The Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop League, the Lollipop Guild. Anyway, there's a bunch of weird small people come out and sing songs to her. These guys look like, Ann and I are dancers. We go to dance retreats, conventions really, at big places where there's 1,000 people. And sometimes they have themes. One time it was a Wizard of Oz theme. Everybody was to come, and Ann did a kind of Glinda outfit. And I came as the Lollipop Guild guy on the left there. I found a dark red plaid shirt, made a big white collar. These guys I figured my size was casting. Of course I have to go as a munchkin. They were much better cosplay people than we. But we are now in a very strange place. And some kids who have not seen the film before, if there are such things, look and get a little scared because of the strangeness. When you go on the journey, it will be different. The point of travel, if you go out of the country, is to see something that's not like home. Some people get spooked out and stay in the hotel the whole time because it's a little too weird for them. We welcome you. The coroner stands and makes a long speech about how the witch is definitely dead. He has a big certificate of death. This is a little creepy, actually, to have all this much talk of death. This is when Dorothy learns that when the house landed, her house landed, it killed somebody, and her feet are sticking out from under the house with red slippers on them. Beautiful shoes, creepy looking feet, she has killed, and the people are very happy that she's killed the wicked witch. Well, she's actually killed one of the wicked witches, and Glinda thinks she should have those shoes and magically transfers them over to Dorothy's feet. They're very pretty. Dorothy doesn't know what she has here. They're magical, they're powerful. This treasure is going to help. This treasure is also going to get Dorothy into trouble, because immediately the wicked witch shows up. Didn't we just kill the, well, there's always another witch. This is shadow energy, whatever we have rejected in ourselves, whatever we are afraid of. Strangely, shadow often gets projected on others. We're afraid in here, and we think, that person over there is looking at me a little strange. They're just standing there. It's our fear and our imagination getting carried away. In the book, the shoes were silver, symbolically probably a richer color, because it indicates arcane teaching about our connection to the moon and the thin strand that connects our body to the astral body. This is all esoteric teaching, which is in the story, but in the movie making, they shifted it to red. Showed up better on new color film. Well, red's pretty significant too. This is the blood mysteries. This is passion and vitality. So they both have, in a way, we have both colors in play here. Miss Gulch has returned in the form of the witch. She claims those slippers. I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too. Yeah, I like playing the witch. Anyway, she can't do anything here. In Munchkin City, there's a little dome of protection, and so she'll get her later. Why is she going to hurt Dorothy? Because Dorothy has these beautiful red slippers. If you've ever been in a competitive situation and somebody's putting down your work, there might be an error in your work. More likely, they're just looking to pick at you. More likely, there's some envy or competition going on. You're the one with the red shoes. Whatever you've got, somebody will envy. Good looking, there you go. You're the one that made some money, there you go. You're the one that's bright in the meeting, there you go. Whatever. And this is your good stuff. These are your red shoes. This is you bring your best to this communal effort, and then there's this pot shot from down the table, and you think, and then maybe you're a pleaser and you try to, it's not going to work. Because the supposed problem with your project isn't it at all. It's something else. Consider the fact that you might be wearing red shoes. How can I get home? Strangely, she was singing about wanting to be over the rainbow. She is now at that place that looks just like the thing she was singing about. Immediately she wants to go home. A little ambivalence here. Oh, well, Glinda says you'll need to go talk to the wizard about that. Oh, there's a wizard? Yeah, and he apparently knows everything. He can solve problems. All right. Well, where's the wizard? Oh, in the Emerald City. You need to get to the Emerald City. Okay, how do I get to the Emerald? You follow the yellow brick road. You stay on that yellow brick road, and you'll get there, and you can talk to the wizard, sort this out. And where's the yellow brick road? Oh, and the Munchkins pull back. And she is standing at the end of a spiral at the very beginning of the yellow brick road. The path begins exactly where you are. That's the point. It spirals like that tornado, meaning we're going to get turned around and disoriented in the course of this journey, a kind of journey within the journey. We have lots of little bits of different religions cited here, and we can see the mandala imagery, and the spiral symbols are in many faiths. L. Frank Baum's parents were devout Methodists, and when he got interested in theosophy, who knows what they thought, which gives me an excuse to tell the oldest joke. So, this devout Jewish fellow is very brokenhearted when his son calls from college and says, Dad, I'm converting to Christianity. And he's just crushed. And he adores this son, and he's a very devout religious man. He goes to his friend who's even more serious about his Judaism, and he says, you won't believe this. My son, he just called, he said he's converting to Christianity. It just kills me. And his friend, who's at temple every day, the guy is really serious about his faith, he says, well, you won't believe this, but my son, he just got in touch and let me know that he is converting. And he too is going to become a Christian. I sent him to Orthodox camp. We had the bar mitzvah, Hebrew school, everything. I did the right thing. I was a good Jewish father, and he's betraying me. Well, this is terrible. We should go talk to the rabbi. And the two agree they should go talk to the rabbi. They go to the rabbi. Saul, he's a great guy and a great rabbi, and they're very devoted to him. Saul, Rebbe, this terrible thing has happened. Both of our sons are converting to Christianity. And Saul, the rabbi, looks at him and says, "You're not going to believe this, but my son just got in touch. He's a son of a rabbi. I mean, we did everything. He knows the Torah inside and out. I cannot believe this is happening." Saul, talk to God about it. You're close to God. Well, I pray. Yeah, but I mean, please. Well, all right. I mean, they seem to misunderstand the powers of a rabbi, but that night in prayer, he talks to God about this, and he tells about these two congregants who have had this heartbreaking experience, and that he himself has had this terrible shock. And God, who sometimes talks to Rabbi Saul, talks on this particular occasion, and he says, "Saul, you're not going to believe this, but my son." I don't know what it has to do with the sermon, but I love that joke. All right. So the story, and I'm going to stop here with the story. It's a big, long story. I'm going to do several sermons on it because I want to do it justice. I want to go into action steps. What do we do with all this rich text? We're on some kind of a journey. We can reflect. We can see that we are Dorothy. Are we gifts of God? Well, on our good days, maybe we are. Okay, I've got 5. The first, honor the inner child. The innocence of our protagonist is our innocence. We have had the orphan feeling. Everyone does. That is the universal longing for safety and belonging. So as an action exercise, you might go to a childhood memory that brings some kind of joy, some kind of support that you got. And even if you've had a rough road, there have been moments. See what you can do to nurture that memory, that part of yourself. The second action step, get in touch with the wisdom of the body. You know, when we have our meditation, we say, settle into your chair, settle into your bones. Notice your feet on the ground. I mean, we have a raised floor, but there's earth down there. We're on the planet here. Stay connected to this energy. Ponder one time in your life when there was some threat to your health, to your physical well-being. Did it lead to any kind of learning about life, about yourself? Was any shift of values or attitude that came from, a serious illness or an injury or some awareness of the fragility of the body? The third is to validate emotional disconnection. What I'm celebrating in the story is Dorothy's decision to run away. That's a legitimate choice, not always accepted by everybody, but crucial if things are really off. When you didn't feel connected and you withdrew, maybe not physically, maybe you didn't run down the country road like Dorothy did, but maybe a little emotional withdrawal. In psychology, we call it dissociation. You just go a little numb. You need to. You pull back. Ever do that? Can you identify a time when you withdrew? What were you feeling? What did you need that wasn't readily available? The fourth out of 5, think about the tornado. What kind of recent storms have been in your life? What has been disrupted? Did they offer any new perspectives? The rupture from the ordinary world can be a time of a little self-exploration. Reflect on that moment. How might it be pushing you towards something even more authentic in yourself? And the fifth, the idea of creating a safe emotional space. Now I'm turning toward Glinda. Sometimes there is a person or a place or a book. There is something that just brings a little more security up for you. What or who in your life helps you feel safe, emotionally safe? Is there anything you can do to cultivate more of that presence? Namaste, blessed be, and so it goes.